Shalom. Welcome. I'm Rabbi Scott with Beth, Yeshua, Messianic Synagogue in Fort Myers, Florida. This is our midweek Torah study when we gather together with you in the middle of the week and do a study on the Torah. This week's Parsha is Parshat 50, meaning Tavo, which means when you come. It is Parshat 50, so we're getting close to the end of the Torah, and we're going to restart after the High Holy Days. So it's coming down to the end of it. It's been a year, and we've arrived here, and so this is an exciting time as we draw to a conclusion for our year of study. A couple comments before we start. As always, if you'd like to communicate, if you'd like to reach out, if you have any questions or discussion, please reach out to me. My email address is included in the description in the video below. And if you would like to join us, Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue in Fort Myers is open for services. We are open, and if you'd like to reach out and if you have any questions about the service, please let me know. But we would love to meet with you and fellowship with you and this. So by all means, consider that. Last thing I would like to say, for those of you who contribute to this ministry, thank you, and we're very grateful for the abundant blessings that you all send to us. If you would like to begin to contribute to this ministry, you may do so. You will find a link in the description below to do that. So thank you, and may Adonai bless you, those who give in faith to this ministry. All right, without further delay, let's begin, if we can. And this, again, Parshat 50, Tavo, when you come. This is from Devarim, Deuteronomy, chapter 26 through chapter 29, verse 8. We will begin with a summary. When Bnei Israel dwelled in the land of Israel, its first fruits are to be taken to the temple and given to the Kohen in a ceremony which expresses the recognition that it is Hashem, Adonai, who guides the history of the Jewish people throughout all the ages. This passage forms one of the central parts of the Haggadah that we read at the Seder, for those of you who are familiar with the traditional Haggadah. On the last day of Pesach, on the 4th and 7th years of the 7-year cycle of tithes, a person must recite a confession that he has indeed distributed the tithes to the appropriate people in the prescribed manner. With this mitzvah, Moshe concludes the commandments that Adonai has told him to give the Jewish people. Moses exhorts them to walk in Adonai's ways, because they are set aside as a treasured people to Adonai. When Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, cross the Jordan River, they are to make a new commitment to the Torah. Huge stones are to be erected, and the Torah written on them in the 70 primary languages of the world, so the tradition goes, after which they are to be covered over with a thin layer of plaster. Half of the tribes will stand on Mount Gerizim and half on Mount Ebal, and the Levi'im will stand in the valley between the two mountains and recite the 12 commandments, and all the people will answer and say Amen to the blessings and the curses. Moses then details the blessings that will be bestowed upon Bnei Israel. These blessings are both physical and spiritual. However, if the Jewish people do not keep the Torah, Moses details a chilling picture of destruction, resulting in exile and wandering among the nations. The summary is provided by Or Sameach, so we encourage you to consider a summary as you go through your study of the Torah. All right, in this Parshat, we've got the laws of the Bichurim, the first fruits. The second section of this week's Parsha, immediately following Parshat, the Bichurim portion, is commonly known as the Vidui, the confession, Ma'asrot, the confession of the tithes, the Mazer. A word of introduction here, that produce in the land is liable for certain taxation and for tithes. And so let's go through and just summarize these tithes. It's called the Terumah, which is approximately 1/50 of it. 1/50th of the harvest must be separated, and that portion belongs to the Kohen and must be given to a member of the Kohanim. That's the first tithe on the land, or the produce of the land. The second tithe is the mazer, which is the 10th. 1/10 of what is left after the terumah is taken is then separated and designated as a gift for the Levi. Then we have the Terumah mazer, which is 1/10 of the mazer is taken by the Levi and given to the Kohen. So whatever you give, that 10th that you give to the Levi turns, and then another 10th is given to the Kohen out of that portion. Then the mazer sheni, the second 10th, 1/10 of what's left after the terumah and the mazer is taken. This is taken to Jerusalem, and is used for a celebration with family and friends. In case it cannot be taken there, its holy status is transferred to money or coins of that value, plus 20%. And these coins are then taken to Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, where they are spent on food and drink with which to celebrate. The reason that I conjecture that there's an additional 20% of the value that's increased is because there's a transaction that's lost. Anytime you have a transaction, you lose a little bit in the transaction. And so if I had 10 sheep and I converted my sheep to money, and then I went to the city and bought sheep, I may only get 9 sheep because the nature of the transactions and markups and profits. Okay. And then the other is the mazer ani, the poor man's 10th. 1/10 of what is left after the terumah and the mazer are taken. This is given to the poor wherever they are. There seems to be some overlap between some of these. Keep in mind that the land works on a 7-year cycle known as a Shemitah, or the Shemitah cycle. For the years 1, 2, 4, and 5, the mazer sheni is taken. For years 3 and 6, the mazer ani is taken instead. So this is what we see. So you see that there's a pretty significant system of tithes and offerings that are given. And then in the 3rd year, you are to give an accounting for what you've given. You are to give a statement, a declaration that you have not withheld any of the tithes, that everything that's in your house that belongs to Adonai, you've indeed given to Adonai. And I wonder if that requirement were adhered to today, that you might have people giving in a little different manner, because you would have to stand there and proclaim to Adonai that you have indeed given the full portions that he is prescribing here. There are 2 mitzvot recorded in the beginning of this parshat. First is the giving of the first fruits, and then these curious declarations. The first declaration is my father was a wandering Aramean, and we have to have this declaration. And then the second declaration is, I have rid my house of the things belonging to Adonai. And this we find in the beginning of the parshat here. Let me pull this up on my screen, and I can read through it with you, of course. But we'll just do that just real quick here. When you come into the land that Adonai your God is giving you as your inheritance, taken possession of it and settled there, you are to take the first fruits of its crops, of all that the ground yields, which you will harvest from your land. You are to put them in a basket, go to the place where Adonai your choose to have his name live. You will approach the Kohen holding office at that time and say to him, today I declare to Adonai your God that I have come to the land Adonai swore to our ancestors he would give us. The Kohen takes the basket from you, you put it down in front of the altar that Adonai your God. And then in the presence, so you are to bring in the tithe. Then in the presence, verse 5, of Adonai your God, you are to say, my ancestor was a wandering Aramean. My ancestor was a nomad from Aram. He went down to Egypt, few in number, and stayed. There he became a great, strong, populous nation. But the Egyptians treated us badly. They oppressed us and imposed harsh slavery on us. So we cried out to Adonai, the God of our ancestors. Adonai heard us and saw our misery and toil and oppression, and Adonai brought us out of Egypt with a strong hand and a stretched out arm, with great terror, with signs and wonders. He's brought us to this place, given us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Therefore, as you see, I have now brought the first fruits of the land, which you, Adonai, have given me. You are then to put the basket down before Adonai your God, prostrate yourself before Adonai God, and take joy in all the good that Adonai your God has given you, your household, the Levi. All right, then it goes on, verse 12. After you've separated a tenth of the crops yielded in the third year, the year of separating a tenth, and have given it to the Levi, the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow, so that they can have enough food to satisfy them while staying with you, you are to say, in the presence of Adonai your God. And this is that second declaration. So there's the two declarations. The first declaration is, my father was a wandering Aramean. And here is the second declaration. You are to say, in the presence of Adonai your God, I have rid myself of the things set aside for God, and have given them to the Levi, the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow, in keeping with every one of the mitzvot you gave me. I haven't disobeyed your mitzvot or forgotten them. I haven't eaten any of this food when mourning. I haven't put any of it aside when unclean. Nor have I given any of it for the dead. I have listened to what Adonai my God has said. I've done everything you ordered me to do. And so, but the curious thing here is this declaration. I have withheld nothing that is your portion. And it reminds me, of course, that Adonai has not withheld any of his portion from me, that he has given freely of himself to me, including even his one and only son, his only begotten son. All right. So these two mitzvot, this declaration of my father, the wandering Aramean, and that I have rid myself of the house, rid my house of the things that belong to Adonai, these two things are bound up together. The wandering Aramean is coming to the land, and the person making the declaration regarding it's coming from the land. It's drawing from the land and presenting that to Adonai. Remember, Jacob was the wandering Aramean who wandered from place to place and didn't come into the ownership of the land the way we are coming into the ownership of the land. Well, how do we bind this to ourselves? Well, these two mitzvot are bound to us in that the place where we dwell is the kingdom of Adonai, and it is the community of Adonai wherein we dwell, and it is the place where Adonai has chosen to make his name live. We don't have a temple at this time, and so there is no Beit Hamikdash, the house of his presence or holiness. There is no Beit Hamakom, the house of his name, and so the house of the place, Makom, the place. So we don't have that, but what we do have is that he has placed his name upon us. We are his, and so the offerings and sacrifices and tithes and gifts that we bring to him in his name, in a sense, whenever we make these to the community, our synagogues or our communities or churches and that sort of thing. Okay, these two mitzvot are bound up in each other because the commonality within them is the place where we live. In this case, it's the land. In our case, it's the kingdom. And so these two mitzvot are connecting us to the kingdom in that sense. So that and it's an interesting thing that the kingdom is such a nebulous idea. It's kind of ethereal or esoteric. It's this idea the kingdom is it's not a real land. It doesn't have geography. It doesn't have laws. It doesn't have a language. And yet it's a very real kingdom that we're very really a part of. And this is the way that we kind of bind ourselves to the reality of that kingdom by these two sort of mitzvot, one of which we say every year at Pesach when we talk about, we say to Adonai, my father was a wandering Aramean. And the other, of course, here, that when you make this statement before Adonai, I have withheld nothing from you. Incidentally, that statement, I have rid my house of the things belonging to Adonai, was a statement that was made, a declaration that was made every 3 years, or in the 3 year of the 7-year cycle. Okay, let's continue on. Verse 16. And this is the day the Lord your God commands you to do these statutes and rules. You shall therefore be careful to do them with all your heart, with all your soul. You have declared today that the Lord is your God, and that you will walk in his ways and keep his statutes and commandments and his rules, and you will obey his voice. The Lord has declared today that you are a people for his treasured possession, as he has promised you, and that you are to keep all his commandments, and that he will set you in praise and in fame and in honor high above all the nations that he has made, and that you shall be a people holy to the Lord your God, as he has promised. That statement alone, just verses 16 through 19 of Devarim chapter 26, that statement alone is something that is still profound and applicable and relevant today. In fact, it reminds us of some of the statements that were contained in 1 Peter chapter 2, where it says, as you come to him, the living stone, rejected by people but chosen by God. We are his chosen, precious to him. What does it say that we are called in verse 18 of Devarim here? That you are a people for his treasured possession. You yourselves as living stones. And what do we see here? That these stones were stood up, and upon these stones was written the covenant, the Torah, the law of God. Make no mistake, people, when you accept Yeshua, when you enter into the kingdom, when you become part of the holy nation, the law of God is written upon you. It is the sign of Adonai upon you, and it is evident to people around you, especially as you grow in your obedience, your devotion, and your submission to Adonai. It is seen in people, on you, by the people around you. It says here in 1 Peter, you yourselves as living stones are being built into a spiritual house, to be Kohanim, set apart for Adonai, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to him through Yeshua the Messiah. What is this house that we're in? This house is the kingdom of Adonai and the community of believers, and we are to be priests to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to him through Yeshua the Messiah. What are these spiritual sacrifices? Some people would redefine the spiritual sacrifices as an expression of perhaps, whether it be prayer or praise and worship or giving or sacrifice, these sort of things. And I appreciate that, and those things are noble and good, but I'm not sure that that's exactly what's spoken of, certainly not in the text in Devarim. The sacrifices here is first of all the mazer, the tithe, the giving to the poor, to the widow, to the orphan, to the priest, and to the household of Adonai, the Beit HaMikdash, the temple. And we have that same applicable today. Anybody who says that we shouldn't give to the widows and orphans and the poor among us is denying the truth of many passages in the Brit Hadashah, etc. So that still remains as a sacrifice that is noble and proper and good. The sacrifice that is noble and proper and good of giving to the kingdom, to the priest, that still is noble and good. And so we find ourselves that if we want to keep this Torah, if we want to keep this law here in Devarim chapter 26, we're able to do so, and it's perfectly relevant to us to do so. And I would submit to you that if you practice this, that you will find yourself more bound to the kingdom in the same sense that these folks, that Israel was bound to the land that Adonai had provided. Okay. In verse 9 of 1 Peter chapter 2, you are a chosen people. What did we see above in verse 18? You're a people for his treasured possession. He has promised you. Let's see. Let's see if it says that. Lord has declared to you today you are a people for his treasured possession, as he has promised you. That he will set you in praise and honor. You'll be his people, holy to the Lord, as he has promised. Verse 9 of 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, you are a chosen people, the king's priests, a holy nation, a people for God to possess. Right? So we definitely have an echo here of what's happening in Devarim chapter 26. Why? In order for you to declare the praises of the one who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. And what does it say? He will set you in praise and in fame and in honor high above all the nations. All right, so continuing on. So we see the echo here in 1 Peter chapter 2, this profound and powerful echo of Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 26. In chapter 27, we see this curious passage of blessings and curses. First, the Torah of the law was written on stones that were smoothed over with plaster. And then from Mount Gerizim came blessings, and from Mount Ebal came curses. This is speaking first of the land, the blessings from and upon the land. It is useful because to the owners, the land is a blessing to them because it produces a harvest. When are we useful to Adonai? We are useful to Adonai when we produce a harvest. What happens if the harvest, we're called to be the salt of the earth, right? And if the salt loses its saltiness, its flavor, it is good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot, giving us the understanding that yes, indeed, we are to be useful because we produce a harvest, and that is our blessing to Adonai. We are the harvest. We can tacitly cooperate with the harvest, but it is Adonai who is the Lord of the harvest. Chapter 26, verse 3, you shall go to the priest who is in office at that time and say to him, I declare today to the Lord your God that I've come into the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to give us. And then verse 15, look down from your holy habitation from heaven and bless your people Israel and the ground that you have given us, as you swore to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. So what you can do vis-a-vis your understanding of the kingdom is you can ask Adonai to bless his people and to bless the kingdom wherein we dwell, wherein his name is placed. All right. Now we've got this phrase, a land flowing with milk and honey. Or actually, let's back it up. Verse 15, chapter 26. Chapter 26 of Devarim. Verse 3. I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come into the land that the Lord swore to our fathers. All right? The Avotenu, our fathers. Then verse 15, look down from your holy habitation from heaven, bless your people Israel, and the ground that you have given us as you swore to our fathers. And then we've got this line, a land flowing with milk and honey. The land that Adonai swore to our fathers to give us. Who are these fathers? Who are the fathers that is being referenced here in this passage? Is it Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? All right. When did Adonai swear to give the land to Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob? Well, we see that. He had Abraham walk the length and breadth and go to and fro throughout the land. And then likewise Isaac went through the land and Jacob did as well. But to which of those did Adonai describe the land as a land flowing with milk and honey? And the truth of the matter is, it was not described ever to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as a land flowing with milk and honey. He didn't use that language. Some scholars and commentators note a distinction in the promise here, that the first promise would be to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that sort of trifecta set of promises regarding the land. And then the second promise, which is indicated and hinted at here in this phrase, a land flowing with milk and honey. And in fact, when do we first see the land flowing with milk and honey? It is actually in Exodus, Shemot, chapter 3. I have come down to rescue them from the Egyptians, to bring them up out of that country to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. This is the promise that is made to the elders of Israel in Shemot, chapter 3. So is the promise here to in chapter 26, is this to our fathers? Is this to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and collectively, successively? Or is it a distinction in the promise, that idea of a double promise, or a distinction in the promise? Rabbi Yitzhak HaShalom discusses this. It can be illustrated with the idea that the Shabbat is holy, but we are to sanctify the Shabbat. We are to make the Shabbat holy. That is, the Shabbat is holy. So let's look at this. Isaiah chapter 58. and this is from the Haftorah. If you hold back your foot on Shabbat from pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you call Shabbat a delight, Adonai's holy day worth honoring, then honor it by not doing your usual things or pursuing your interests or speaking about them. Whose day is this? It's clear in this passage, Isaiah 58, Yeshayahu. It is my holy day, Adonai's holy day. It says, pursuing your interests on my holy day, if you call Shabbat a delight, Adonai's holy day worth honoring. If you call Shabbat a delight, Adonai's holy day, Shabbat, worth honoring. If you call it a delight, worth honoring, then honor it by not doing your usual things or pursuing your interests or speaking about them. It's that sort of a dichotomy that the Shabbat is Adonai's holy day, and it is reserved as his holy day, and yet he has given it to us as his holy day, but for us to make holy. We make it holy by making it special, by not doing any of those things we normally do, by making it a day reserved unto Adonai. Exodus chapter 31, verse 12, Adonai says to Moses, "Tell the people of Israel, you are to observe my Shabbats, for this is a sign between me and you throughout all your generations, so that you will know that I am Adonai who sets you apart from me." There again, that idea that we are a people who are set apart for him. Who sets us apart for him? He does. I am Adonai who sets you apart for me. Therefore, you are to keep my Shabbat. And here we have the part of the dichotomy. That is, it is his day, but we are to keep it. We sanctify it. We make it holy. There's no question that in the heavenlies, throughout the span of history, throughout the history of the world, the history of creation, the entire time, from beginning till end, the Shabbat is Adonai's holy day. And regardless if any person on the planet observes the day will still be a holy day. However, we are called to keep it and to sanctify it and to make it a holy day. Verse 16 from Shemot, Exodus chapter 31. The people of Israel are to keep the Shabbat, to observe the Shabbat throughout all their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the people of Israel forever. Again, we've got this perpetual covenant, we've got a forever. This is an eternal sort of thing here. The holiness of the Shabbat is Adonai's holiness that he has invested in this day, making it his day, and it is eternal. And then, of course, he takes that eternalness, that eternity of the Shabbat, and he invests it in the seventh day of our experience. For in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth, but on the seventh day he stopped working and rested, from verse 17 here of Exodus 31. All right, so what am I saying? And it is this, that while the Shabbat is holy and it belongs to Adonai, it is given to us to make it holy. Now, what does Adonai say about the land? Well, first of all, he says the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. But he also says that Israel is his land. It is his land that he is giving to the people of Israel. The land is a blessing, but we must bring forth the harvest, which will be the blessing, and that's how we sanctify the land, is by bringing forth the harvest and presenting it to Adonai. From Devarim, chapter 6, when Adonai your God has brought you into the land he swore to your ancestors, that he would give you cities great and prosperous, which you didn't build, houses full of all sorts of good things, which you didn't fill, water cisterns dug out, which you didn't dig, vineyards and olive trees, which you didn't plant. It says, after you've eaten your fill, be careful that you don't forget Adonai who brought you out of the land of Egypt, where you've lived as slaves. And so this is the nature of it, that you inherit of the land a sense of the provision that's in the land. What is it that we inherit from the kingdom of Adonai? We inherit all the blessings of the kingdom of Adonai because Adonai has been cultivating his kingdom for the last thousands of years, 3,500 years, effectively, if you want to look at it that way, or if you're thinking of it in terms of Yeshua and the way of the Talmudim and the way, the Brit Chadashah, then you could say 2,000 years. But in either case, you can't deny that Adonai has been the one maintaining his kingdom, that it is his kingdom, and that he gives it to us to bring forth harvest from his kingdom. Okay. Here is my point of it, and it is this, that we receive the land, but we need to put the land to work immediately. We need to work to bring forth a harvest. It is both that we are blessed with its faithfulness, and we are blessed if we are faithful with it. And that's the fundamental aspect of what I think is being offered to us here. That when I bring forth of my land or my labors, the fruit of my hand, the work of my hands, when I bring that to Adonai, that I sanctify my life by my giving of that portion to Him. I mean, consider the opposite. A person who works very, very hard, earns their money, and provides for their family, but doesn't give back anything to Adonai, they have not sanctified their labor. They have not set their labor aside as for Adonai, and rather their labors are given to their own considerations. It is only portions that we are asked to give Adonai in order to accomplish the sanctification, in order to make that holy. In the same way, the kingdom of Adonai and our labors therein both honor the holiness and the ownership of that. We honor Adonai because it is His kingdom. We bring forth the harvest for Him. We honor Him as diligent and dutiful servants. But we also make the kingdom a kingdom of harvest. And it is left up to us to do that. It is a partnership. It is a cooperation. We are doing this amazing task with Adonai, and by His Ruach, by His Spirit. So we effectively are taking something that is holy, and we are making it holy ourselves. Who made the Shabbat holy? Well, Adonai made the Shabbat holy, but He calls us to keep it and make it holy. And when we do that, we are acting like Him. What was the big curse of the Garden of Eden? It was to go to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and become like gods. And I firmly believe that the tree was there because we were eventually, either by eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil or by His discipleship and by His teaching, we were eventually going to come into the knowledge of good and evil. But it just wasn't time. In the same way, a child doesn't eat solid food when they first are born. Adam and Eve were infants in the garden, and they could eat of all the other trees, and they could fellowship in the communion of Adonai. They could eat of all the other trees, and they could fellowship in the communion of Adonai. But instead, they became like gods and took of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What is it that we have now but an opportunity to recreate what we got wrong in the Garden of Eden, in saying, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make the Shabbat holy. I'm going to make the work of my hands, the produce of my labors. I'm going to make my labors holy in the same way that Adonai made the Shabbat holy. He calls me to make the Shabbat holy and to make my life holy. We see this in marriage. My daughter's getting married next week, and they are going to make themselves holy unto each other. They are creating a new thing, and it is a marriage. So these are some of the points that we have here, and the incredible opportunity that we have here to follow in the footsteps of Adonai and in His creative work. And we get to do it in all places on the Shabbat. It's like the heavy lifting was done, and now we're left with the Shabbat, which is a Shabbat of rest. But by resting on the Shabbat, we create the holiness of the Shabbat. So it is a form of creation or creative power that we are participating with the Ruach. But it's in that resting on the Shabbat. Likewise, much of what we do, whether it's in the kingdom, and even truly much of what we do in the world, is a participation. We are participating with Him in the gathering of crops that perhaps somebody else has sowed and we reap, or somebody else has planted and we reap, these kinds of things. So in the same way, that in Devarim 6 it says that they would come and they would find houses full of good things and crops and vineyards all ready to harvest. All right. Thank you for joining me this week. If you have any questions or comments on this study, I would enjoy that. I can be reached via email. I will be out next week, so you won't hear from me next week, but perhaps very quickly thereafter. May Adonai bless you and keep you this week, and may He go with you and guard your going out and your coming in, both now and forevermore. Shalom, shalom.